Tēnā koutou katoa, ko George toku ingoa, he Science Engagement Manager o Inesi. So, hello everyone, I'm George and I'm the Science Engagement Manager at Inesi. And I've got the privilege of chairing this session. So we're here, I think this is post-lunch, so we've pulled together some of the most exciting talks to energize the crowd in that lovely post-lunch, post-Vegemite toast time period around data, its management, its visualization and manipulation. And we're going to crack into it with Lucas Trombach from Waipapa Taumatarau, so University of Auckland. And Lucas is going to be bringing order to the chaos, which sounds fabulous. Thanks, Lucas. Improving the reliability of a Python library for data ingestion. So take it away, Lucas.
Thank you. Kia ora koutou katoa. Thanks for the introduction. My name's Lucas and I do work for the University of Auckland. And I'll be talking about something that I've been working on for the last couple of months. And it's about improving a Python library / Python script that is meant for data ingestion. But before I can talk a bit about the sort of Python and programmatic side of things, I probably need to explain why we're even building this library and what it's meant for. And the main idea is that we want to have an instrument data service at the University of Auckland. By we mean the Centre for E-Research. So the motivation for this is that scientific instruments over the last couple of years and decades have just started to produce more and more data. I'm working with another group at the university who has built their own little sort of microscope, and they can easily produce images up to terabytes in a day. And all of that data, and most importantly, the metadata that's associated with it, it needs to go somewhere. We need to store it so that we don't lose all that information. Many funders have recognized this situation as well. For example, the Royal Society of New Zealand now often, maybe always, asks for research data management plans to be submitted together with the grant applications. And we're also hoping that out of this, we will get a bit more mature data management because the current system is very ad hoc. We basically sort of help people out if they need some help, but mainly lots of the instrument data is managed by the instrument owners or technicians themselves. We also hope to get some quality of life improvements for researchers out of this, because the system will also make the data itself more accessible to those researchers. The software that we've chosen for this is called MyTardis. MyTardis is a research data repository. It's basically just a database for metadata storage, but it also allows to have fine-grained access control levels for people, which is quite useful when you're talking about sensitive data, for example. MyTardis has an internal hierarchy of objects, as we call them, MyTardis objects. And it's quite similar to how research works at the University of Auckland. Therefore, it was quite a good fit for us. So there's projects, and then projects can contain one or many experiments, and then those contain data sets, and then data files eventually. And each of those levels can actually have metadata associated with it. So it's quite a powerful system, and it's very free-form in the sense that you can store all sorts of metadata that you might want to do, and you're not locked into one specific way of doing things. It was originally developed at Monash University, but we at the Centre for E-Research actually maintain a fork in our own repository. And there's a few changes, and we're working with upstream to make it a bit more even, but that's still a work in progress at the moment. What do we envision this service to look like in the end? Well, we're hoping to have many instruments on board at some point, as shown on the left here on the diagram. And then each instrument will get an ingestion node, What that exactly is going to look like, we're not entirely sure, but it's probably going to be probably just a virtual machine, and it's going to run a piece of software, some command line tool, something that ingests the data, the data that the instruments produce, ideally automatically. And it uses the MyTardis API for this. And then once it's ingested into MyTardis, there's a web interface, and then hopefully we have lots of happy researchers interacting with the web interface and making it a lot easier for them. I'm actually only going to be talking about this part today. MyTardis is a whole other beast. It's a very reasonably old code base, and it's quite large. But the ingestion side of things, we've decided to sort of take out of MyTardis a bit and write our own sort of Python script for that. The main goals that we're trying to achieve is basically historically motivated because the ingestion library, as we're calling it now, started out as a simple Python script, as it often does. So it was very simple, very basic, and it grew kind of organically from there. And Python is really good for that. Fast, rapid prototyping, just get something working. But to my opinion, and I'm probably a bit biased here, and many people will probably disagree with me, but from my personal opinion, Python isn't necessarily the best tool for such a solution. If you want a fully fledged piece of software that is very reliable, you can certainly do it in Python, but you need to put in a little bit more work than maybe with other languages. But you can improve the situation. You can, for example, you can use the type hint system that's there nowadays, but you can also try to use other programming patterns and that hopefully can help you sort of make your code more reliable and also more maintainable. That's also a really important part. So let's just dive into the main improvements that we've been making and that we're still sort of making currently, because it's still a work in progress. But the way I'm going to be doing this is I'll basically try to show you sort of a before and after view of the code. So what did it used to look like when it was just a script, and what are we aiming for now, or what have we already improved? And the first thing I wanted to highlight is something like this. So you can imagine if you have a piece of software that has to talk to a server somewhere, in this case, the MyTardis database, you need to put some sort of basic configuration with the ingestion node to enable this. For example, this could be a username, API keys, and there's also other more specific to things to MyTardis. For example, we have this the default schemas on here, but that's sort of a one-off configuration thing. And they used to be stored just in this plain dictionary. And while that works well, it can cause lots of complications. For example, you kind of have to write code like this if you want to be absolutely sure that the values that you want to read from this dictionary are actually there. There might be other ways of doing this. I'm actually not a huge Python expert, but basically what was in the code was that there was lots of try and excepts everywhere in the code, just because we needed to access something from a dictionary that, well, if we're diligent, we know it's there, but if we want to make the code more reliable at runtime, we have to kind of catch these exceptions. And it just is a lot of boilerplate code for this kind of workflow, really. So, and another thing is also that sometimes we need to make sure that the values for some of these configuration items actually are aligned with a certain pattern. For example, you saw the schemas in the configuration file here, and for a very strange reason that I don't fully understand, they actually have to be URLs. So you also, if you want to make sure that all of these values are correct, you have to verify them. And there's a very neat library to do this, which is called Pydantic, which is basically meant for this kind of configuration and settings management. And basically, our code now, after we've built everything around Pydantic, the way that we actually use is basically looks like this one line at the bottom. Well, now you might ask me, well, we still have to configure those values somewhere. Yes, and that's the whole trick about Pydantic. It allows you to read those values from the environment. Let me first explain how to set Pydantic up a little bit. So on the left side, you can sort of see how a model looks like. You have to build models in Pydantic. And for example, here I built a simple model for the connection information, as I called it. You can see there's a host name field in there, and it has a type hint with HTTP URL. Pydantic uses this actually to verify that this is whatever value you pass in there is actually a HTTP URL. If not, it throws an exception. And sorry, I'm hearing some voices here. It throws an exception, and well, you can either catch this exception or just stop the program flow. You can also have default values, but they're basically just classes, so you can use them as normal. Then if you set it up in this base settings class as in the bottom, you can configure that how your configuration will be read from the environment. So the most important thing I want to put your attention to here is the nested delimiter. It's a double underscore. And if we look how we can, on the right side now, how we can use this, we can, for example, create a .env file, which is sort of a standard for doing these kind of things. And we now can just put in a variable name connection double underscore host name. And that basically, Pydantic can map this to the connection field and then the host name field within that connection subclass, basically. And then we can just set it to a value, how we would normally do with .env, and it all works automatically. The neat thing about Pydantic is also that we can just use different ways of setting up our environment. We can, for example, just export the variable. That's perfectly fine. That actually takes precedence over the .env file. That can also be changed, but that's the default. And we can always just inject sort of the values into the constructor as well. So if we really need a different value, it's really flexible and easy to just set up different configuration objects and makes things so much easier. And obviously, you get all the neat things that you get when you use classes in Python. You get in your IDE, you get IntelliSense. You can use MyPy. I'll talk about this a bit later. Actually, I think on the next slide, you can use MyPy and these kind of things to just make your code a bit more robust and have it fail less at runtime. Another thing that we found in the code was often these kind of constructs here, where there were type hints. For example, the first function returns a tuple, or the last function returns a dictionary. But that's all the information that we got. The tuple, we don't know what does this tuple consist of. How many values are in the tuple? What are their types? Are they strings? Are they integers? What are they? So it helps a little bit, but not all that much. And we've done quite a bit of refactoring to make this all a bit more usable with MyPy. So MyPy isn't used for refactoring, but it's the tool that can help you check all of this these types. It also comes with extensions for all sorts of IDEs. So you can have those checks run while you're writing the code, which I personally find very useful. But basically, we've refactored many things to have these data classes, basically. So we have, for example, a raw project data class, which maps to a project object in my TARDIS. And then we have strongly typed sort of type hints on there as well. And also we've included this in the return values of all of our functions, and MyPy can check all of these things and make sure that you return the right thing from your function. But also, most importantly, if another function calls smelt project in this context, ignore the name of the function. It's a bit convoluted, but you basically know what the function will return, and MyPy can check this all for you. And again, it's also a bit of documentation for people who maybe read the code for the first time, and that is always a good thing. The last sort of thing, bigger thing that I wanted to talk about is actually more of a programming pattern. So I've mentioned the configuration dictionary that we had in the beginning, and that was actually the way it was used. It was passed into class constructors into these init functions, and then it was used to set up classes. There's nothing really wrong with that, but again, you'd have to check if the fields are actually in there, and again, lots of boilerplate code. What was a bit more worrying, as shown sort of in the second function here, where we actually instantiate another class inside this constructor with the configuration. Then we update this configuration file to instantiate another class. So now we basically have made a side effect somewhere that someone else who's just using these classes doesn't know about, and can cause lots of unexpected behavior. So there's actually a really good pattern to avoid these things, and it's called dependency injection. And what dependency injection does is it's actually a very simple concept. Instead of instantiating classes inside the constructor as we do on the left side, so if we say, for example, the first line overseer equals and then overseer constructor, we pass those values into the constructor. It's often also called inversion of control, because you basically sort of create these objects outside the class that actually needs to use them. That already helps with these kind of things. It also helps with testing, because it makes mocking a class a lot easier. And there's a bit of a work in progress here to include the library on the top right, which is called dependency injector. What that is for is it can sort of simplify certain aspects of dependency injection. When you do dependency injection, you can get these massive constructors, because it's all nested inside each other, and it can be very difficult to write, and tedious to write, most importantly. With dependency injector, you can actually write code, and I'm not going to go into it, I just wanted to mention it, but you can basically write a little bit of code that does most of these things automatically, and sort of sets default for lots of these things that you might want to inject. Then just some other minor improvements that or tips that I maybe wanted to mention here. We already had tests with PyTests. It's really important that you also still test your code, even if you do all of these MyPy shenanigans. What we found really useful is we wrote fixtures for commonly used classes and configuration, so that we could rely on them sort of having the same information. For example, here at the top left, I have one for some configuration classes. We wrote fixtures, and then we can just use those. Or below that, parameterizing tests is really useful in my opinion. I found myself, before I knew about this, writing 4 test functions that were essentially the same. But if you parameterize it properly, then you can write the function once, and PyTest can actually take care of running the test with multiple inputs. And I've mentioned it before, if you have an API that you need to talk to, consider mocking it. There's heaps and heaps of libraries that allow you to, for example, interact with the requests object in Python. And you can set up some clever systems there where you can sort of mock these responses before, and can pretend that you're actually talking to a server. And you can sort and you can basically return sort of expected values. Yeah, and that's basically the end of it. All these tools, they're just suggestions. There's so many tools in Python. There's also lots of alternatives. But this is just sort of an example of the things that we've been trying to do with this library to make it a bit more reliable and maintainable and readable, all in terms of what we've learned a lot about today already with FAIR for software. I think that's really important to go a bit more into this direction. And with that, I think I'm at the end of my talk and happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Lucas. Unfortunately, we don't have time to ask the questions, but there are questions and a couple of suggestions or tips from the community in the Q&A area. So definitely go and have a look, and maybe we can keep that korero going in the discussion forum. So thanks, Lucas. And now I am going to invite Maxime Rio onto the stage. He's a data science engineer at NESI and NIWA, a busy gentleman. And his talk is entitled, Show Me the Data, Large-Scale Interactive Data Visualization with Xarray. Thanks, Maxime.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Maxime Hao. Welcome to my presentation, which has been prepared with my colleague, Amir Piros from NIWA. First, I'll start with a few words about myself. So as George mentioned, I'm a data scientist at NIWA, the the National Institute for Weather and Atmospheric Research, and also a data science engineer at NESI, the National E-Science Infrastructure. And I also do love our Manu in Aotearoa. But as part of my job, actually, I encounter people that work on very large data sets and that sometimes want to visualize and manipulate them. And that brings me to today's problem. The one I want to talk about is, okay, let's imagine you have a very large data set which is sitting on a distant server, distant storage. It's too big for you to retrieve it on your local hard drive, yet you want to explore it interactively. What I want to show you today is a couple of packages, Python packages, that you can mesh together to obtain an interactive web-based dashboard, which will have two main components. A server component will be deployed next to the storage. And this one will stream some images to your web browser and plots that you can interact with. And to give you an actual use case I'm developing as part of my work at NIWA, so with my colleague Amir, we are dealing with 3 years archived of forecasts from the high resolution model called NZCSM, and that means about 27,000 netcdf files, 2.4 terabyte of data. It's quite a lot. And in my case, I only want to interact with the surface temperature, and I want to do some daily aggregation. So look at the minimum and maximum daily temperature, and also the distributions of values. So how will we address that? So as part of this talk, I'll show you three main packages: Xarray, Task, and Holovis, and we'll see how they work together. If time permits, there will be a little demo, but I'm not sure we'll get there. Okay, so first, Xarray, what it is. It's a package, a Python package that helps you to manipulate multidimensional arrays. Think about NumPy. However, what it gives you with this data array class is you can label your dimensions, so the axes are dimensions. And on top of that, you can associate coordinates, which means that for some of the axes, the coordinate axis, you can select your array based on information like time. You don't use integer-based indexes, but you can use the real value around this axis. And you can also store some metadata, which is always good, so you keep the documentation of your data close to it, and we'll see an example of this in a minute. It's nice to have one array, but what if we could actually put them together as a collection of arrays, and that's called a data set in Xarray. And the cool thing with this is all your arrays don't need to have all the same dimensions defined, yet you can still slice and dice all of your variables together with one command, and that's very neat. And on top of that, you have the regular math operations, like you can add variables, you can subtract, and also more involved things like resampling or interpolation. An example for our use case. So here I've loaded one files of our 27,000 just to have a quick look at it. And we see that, okay, we have an Xarray dataset which has 10 dimensions. And these dimensions let us define some coordinates. So again, the coordinates, instead of being integer based, they will have real values like latitude and longitude. And we have 31 variables. And I will focus on one variable. As I said previously, I only want to look at the surface temperature, so SFC underscore temp. And this is a data array, which in this case have only three dimensions. And if we look at the attributes, it's quite interesting because here it has recorded that, okay, the units are Kelvin, and this is actually the air temperature at 1.5 meter. And that's the core of the data structure will be manipulated. But okay, now I want to use the whole dataset. So I will use this Xarray Open MF dataset, MF like multiple files, which will parse the header of all my files and try to merge them together in a gigantic dataset. Fortunately, there's some pre-processing. You can inject a pre-processing function. And in my case, I use this to subset it and only keep the surface temperature. And I can also say on which axis I want to merge the different datasets. And thanks to the rich display from Jupyter Notebook, and that was also what was presented before, you can see on the bottom the actual dimensions of my array. It's quite large, actually. It's about 300 gigabyte, even after subsetting the full dataset. However, nothing is loaded yet, thanks to the magic brought to us by Dask, which I will talk in a second. What is Dask? Dask is an out-of-core computation package in Python that lets you run many tasks in parallel, figuring out their dependency. And there are three main parts of Dask. So on the left, we have sort of the high-level API, your application programming interface, that the user will manipulate to instruct Dask about what are the tasks we want to do and what are the dependencies. Under the hood, Dask will build a task graph of the computations so that when you press the run button, it will pass it to a scheduler that you will have configured to and execute in the right order concurrently all your tasks. What is amazing with Dask is you have a really large variety of high-level APIs and also many schedulers. So for this talk, I'm only using a local set of processors, but you can scale up a lot by using a Slurm-based scheduler or Kubernetes-based scheduler or MPI-based scheduler, and I think I'm forgetting some because there are a lot of them. So let's focus a bit on the Dask Array API because that's the one which is used under the hood by Xarray. So a Dask array is exactly the same as a NumPy array, except that when you do operations on it, nothing is executed. So it's just a mock array if you want, and Dask uses it under the hood to build this task graph and know the dependencies between the computations. So it takes an array A and an array B, you add them, you get an array C, and nothing has been executed yet. But Dask knows that it needs to add data from the two when you run the compute method. In addition of this, you can chunk your arrays. So instead of representing your array as a very large block of data, you have small chunks, and this will be multiple tasks actually. And when you run Dask, all of this will be run in parallel. And if we look on the bottom right here, you'll see that in the details of our Xarray array view, you see that it's actually a Dask array, and we have the chunk size. So 2 by 130, sorry, by 1,350 by 1,200. That's the chunk, the size of one chunk. Okay, so one more thing about Dask, just to show you that it's not only about lazy loading and retrieving one bit at a time. With Xarray, you can do more things. I mentioned resampling, and under the hood, it will keep that as a Dask task. So here I'm resampling my data on a 24 hours basis, and I'm taking the maximum and the minimum. So I will have two data array, t underscore max, t underscore min. And this is, again, here's a Dask array under the hood. Nothing has been computed yet. However, we can ask the object, okay, what is the graph under the hood? And here I'm only showing you one time point, and you can see that's already quite a massive graph, and you can multiply this by 27. No, a bit less because we have resampled by 24 hours. Sorry. So that's the second ingredient. The third one will be actually the plotting, because it's everything here is about doing a dashboard, so you need some plotting. And I want to bring to your attention here the HoloViz ecosystem, which is an umbrella project of Python packages, which are meant to work well together. And here I want to highlight 4 of them, which I'm using for this dashboard. The first one is hvplot and underlying based on HoloViews. So that's for the plotting part. Then we have panel, which is nice to create widgets and also create layouts and actually serve the dashboard. We have GeoViews, which is very practical to deal with geospatial data and plot it properly. And the last one, data shader, is a very interesting one. So this one will do server-side rendering. And what that means, actually, it means that when your data is it's quite large, instead of streaming a very large plot to the web browser of your user, you first generate an image locally on the server, which has the right zoom level, and you only send this smaller image to the web browser. And when in the user interface, the person will zoom in or out, the server recompute a new image and stream this to the web browser. I'll just do a quick focus on hvplot because it's an interesting lasagna of APIs, and it's good to be aware of the different parts of it, especially if you want to do more advanced visualization. So at the very bottom of the stack, you have Bokeh, which is another Python package, which is responsible for making the core plots and also spawning the web server. Then you have this intermediate layer, HoloViews, which has this nice property that the way you work with HoloViews is you annotate your data. So you tell it, okay, the data has these dimensions, and once you do your annotation, you can tell it, okay, I want to plot dimension 1 against dimension 2, and please make it a scatter plot. But if you followed so far, Xarray already gave us this annotation information, and that's where hvplot becomes very handy, because it will translate sort of all the good annotation work done on Xarray to inform HoloViews how to use that internally for its plotting mechanism. And the way hvplot works is it will add a new method to your Xarray object, which is hvplot, which has a very wide API, but lets you create, well, a lot of plots out of the box. And the one you see on top right, for example, this is one where I took the original Xarray dataset, and I say, okay, I want to plot some geographical data, latitude against longitude. I didn't say anything about time, so it added for me a nice slider over time, and that's it. Just one more detail about our use case. So here, what I said originally is I wanted to have a I wanted to show the daily minimum and maximum temperature. So I'll use my t_max and t_min variables, which were my data arrays of free sample data. And I use this hvplot function. And actually, I'm calling it a quad mesh, which is a special type of plots. And I will get two subplots objects. And how do you combine them side by side? Use a plus. And voila, you have a side-by-side plots, and it's smart enough so it knows that the time dimension is shared. So I only have one slider for the two plots, and they're synchronized. I wanted to go a bit beyond this, and for my full dashboard, I added the following elements. So I wanted to have a so first, I wanted to add a widget. So instead of having a slider to select my time, I wanted to have a date picker that was easy to add and to bind to the slider. Then I wanted to also change the layout, and Panel has a lot of things to do the layout. And you have an example on the right, how to sort your columns and your rows, and then you can put the different elements in it, and even spacer, very practical. Oh, and by the way, I don't write JavaScript and HTML, and this did all the job for me, so I was pretty happy about this. But I have to be honest with you, I also wanted to have my daily histogram. I managed to do it, but it took me a couple of hours to find a good solution. So sometimes things don't work out of the box, and you have to be creative. This is how it looks like, the end dashboard. And so you have I have my two minimum and maximum daily temperature on the top. Again, as I said, I rearranged the layouts. So I have my widgets on the bottom left, and I have my histogram on the right. With the date picker here, I can click, it will change the slider and update everything. And I'll show you, if time permits, at the very end how that looks live. So I'll just skip the demo for now. And just a quick conclusion. So I hope you enjoyed this probably a bit fast tour of the Python package ecosystem to create interactive web-based visualization. For some cases, it's really nice. It works very easily. But be aware that there are still some corner cases and packages are evolving, so it's good to revisit from time to time. And I'll skip their advanced bits, which I don't think we have time to talk about today, but I've only scratched the surface in that talk. I want to mention also that I'm part of a great team, the computational science consultancy at NESI. If you've not heard about us, you can visit the NESI website to know more about what we do. But in a nutshell, we help researchers to render code faster and better on the platform. But not only, we can create these sort of things for you or help you develop yours and scale them up. So don't hesitate to contact us at support@nesi.org.nz. On this note, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. And I'll just show briefly the demo, hoping everything works. So do we see? Yeah, okay. So it's in a notebook. Be aware that with Panel, you can serve it as an external application, so it does not have to be in a notebook. And here is the real reality behind is it takes a couple of seconds to update when I slide it. So there's still some optimization to be made. And yeah, so now you'll see I've switched to 2018-12 and has updated the histogram. And if I click here, I can change the date and it will, sorry, will it? Okay, demo effect. It did not update my slider. I'm sorry about this. Oh no, it did. Okay, so and under the hood, it's powered by Dask. And the last thing I'll show you is you can zoom in and you can move around, and it will synchronize the two plots. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Thanks, Maxime. Definitely a whirlwind tour. Now, I'm just checking the live Q&A, and we have an awesome thanks for sharing in the Q&A, so that's great. I'm wondering then, while people get their creative juices flowing and start to think about what they might do with Xarray, like what's the coolest application of this tool you've done?
Oh, actually, it's a date back from my previous life when I was working with a neuroscientist in UK, and they were exploring microscopy brain images. And so for this, I wanted to see if I could explore a 300 gigabyte a stack of images interactively, and you can use this for this technology to do it. And what's very nice is something I only briefly talked about is you have this data shader part, which lets you zoom in and out on a massive image, but actually you never load the massive image in the web browser. You only load what is good at the right resolution. So that's something I really enjoyed making at that time.
Awesome. I'll just give the audience, there is a couple more minutes, so just give you a moment to drop your questions in. Otherwise, oh, great plug for Niwa there with the coffee cup. Is there anything with 1 minute to go that you'd like to let people know about Xarray?
I'm 1 minute to go to talk about Xarray. It took me quite some time actually to start using it and realize actually I was missing out not using it. And if I can, maybe that will speak to some people. For a long time, I was using NumPy only and never Pandas. And at some point, I realized that actually to organize my data, Pandas was very neat and could simplify my work a lot. Well, Xarray was my next jump after Pandas. And of course, the tools have different usage, and I think both have very cool use cases. But Xarray is very nice, and it supports the Xar format. If you don't know about the Xar format, please have a look at it. It's very neat if you do concurrent writing, and I think that will be my final word.
Okie dokie. Well, thank you very much, Maxime. Thanks again, round of applause and all that sort of thing. So now you're relieved, and I can introduce the next lucky person. who is Anthony Donner from Digital Science. And Anthony's going to be doing a demo for us on research management and digital repository solutions with symplectic elements and Figshare. So I'll hand over to you, Anthony.
Thank you very much, Georgina. That's very nice of you to introduce me. Kia ora. I'm actually coming to you from Sydney, Australia today. So I'm first going to acknowledge the people, the traditional custodians of the land, the Camaragal people, and pay respect to their elders, both past and present. As said, I work for a company called Digital Science, and what Digital Science does is, or what we have is, a number of portfolio products that operate in the space of research management, research data, and things like that. We work with the universities across New Zealand and across the globe, as well as corporations, publishers, government and funding agencies, and things like entities like that in the space of research management and data management. So in this talk, I guess I'm going to take a little bit of a step backwards from specific data kind of cases that you've probably been hearing about, but rather the management of data that is being produced by researchers or people in the novel research sector. So, and to do that, I'm actually going to look at two of our company's portfolio products. The first one being symplectic elements. Symplectic elements is used by almost all the universities in New Zealand and a number of other entities, so don't be surprised if you have already heard of it. You may also well be using and just not knowing it as an end user. The other solution that I'm going to talk about is Figshare. Figshare is our data repository solution, and enables researchers or people of similar nature to upload data or non-traditional research outputs, so outputs or formats of things that are being produced by researchers that are potentially useful to the rest of the rest of research kind of ecospace or environment across the globe. You may well have heard of Figshare as well, as it's being used by a number of entities in New Zealand. So let's have a quick look. We know, and this isn't new to anyone, managing research information can be challenging, and there's a number of restrictions there. The reason I pitched the abstract on these two portfolios is they actually work really very closely together. I know a number of talks earlier in the conference have mentioned the FAIR principles, findability, accessibility, interoperability, and the reuse of data. Figshare does exactly that and looks to solve those problems. It is a data repository that enables people to upload their outputs and then makes them findable and accessible to people across the globe. It then interlinks very, very nicely with symplectic elements. Symplectic elements is, well, basically anything uploaded into Figshare can be linked to or fed into elements, along with a number of other kind of data sources, and then meshed together to produce what is an optimized reporting tool for institutions. Let's have a quick look at symplectic. So this is what the back end of symplectic elements looks like. If you've seen a screen that looks a little bit like this, you're using symplectic to feed in your own publication data or your own awarded grant application data or your records of impact or professional outcomes. That's what a private page will look like. And symplectic elements is essentially used by organizations, universities, or government agencies to do any one or a number of these things. You'll notice that there's a number of screens here, or what we call modules. Symplectic elements is a modular system that allows an organization to simply feed data in on their equipment, or feed data in on their people, or feed data in on their grant workflows. And it doesn't necessarily need to capture all of that, depending on the priorities of an organization. Here's some example of external data sources that can be fed into symplectic elements, where researchers are using these or publishing their works on any one of these systems. That data can be fed in automatically into the back end of elements. Also, if an institution's collecting other sources of data, HR data, for example, or a number of other sources of data on their researchers, that can also be linked to symplectic elements and fed in to report on various things. If we have a quick look at Figshare, Figshare is actually freely and available to anyone. If you go to figshare.com, you're able to upload any one of any sort of research output that you consider to be useful to the rest of the globe. Once this is done, a DOI will be minted on this record. You'll be able to enter any amount of metadata that you may want on that record. This enables that record to then be findable and accessible to other researchers globally. There's also various licensing that can be placed on these entities. So we like to say that Figshare is as open as possible, but as closed as necessary. If you do want your research data to be locked down to a certain number of people or a certain organization, or not, you want it simply to be freely and legally available to everyone across the globe, you can set a Creative Commons license based on your wish there. We also track and gain metrics on anything that's popped into Figshare. So once someone uploads a record, you'll be able to see how many people are actually reading that or visiting that page, as well as how many people are citing that in other works, or where that particular record or video or whatever it might be is being used in blog posts or across the media and things like that. So I'm going to quickly, if I have time, jump out of this and just quickly show off what it looks like in real life. So I'm using University of Auckland's example of a Figshare repository here. If you go to auckland.figshare.com, you'll find this. And I tended to talk earlier today that was on flood data and management of flood data. So I'm actually going to jump into Figshare's repository and see what this looks like, or search for flood content that researchers there have uploaded related to floods. And you'll notice that this a number of records have popped up here. I can filter by this down here, and if I want to click on one of these, I'll show you an individual record. This one looks interesting because it looks like it has some videos, and this particular record it's the supporting information for a publication that this researcher has produced, along with a number of colleague researchers. And if I click on view here, I can actually view a specific record within this group of records, and it's a video. And this is a really showing off how Figshare actually previews different forms. This doesn't necessarily need to be an MP4. It can be any sort of file format, and there'll be a preview there if it's a PDF, or a preview if it's a Word document, or whatever it might be. And we can play this, and this is a video of flooding that's of supporting information to the document in hand. You can also see how many times this particular data or video has been cited, and how many times it's been downloaded and viewed, because all of that is captured on a record. The back end of Figshare looks a little bit like this. This is my instance. I've uploaded a number of records or presentations or whatever it might be, and I've made these available to whoever I want through links that are generated. If I click over here, rather than using, like I said earlier, symplectic elements is actually used by the majority of universities in New Zealand. So rather than using a New Zealand example, I thought I'd jump out of there and look at an example where Ohio State in the US obviously is using symplectic elements to capture data on their researchers across the state. And if I wanted to search out experts in a particular field, I'm going to do nuclear magnetic resonances, as in a previous life I was of understanding of NMR. I can pull up all the experts themselves to nuclear resonance, filter them by exactly where they're based or which institution they're at. I can also click across as this Ohio Innovation Exchange is capturing information on equipment as well. If I didn't want to look at the experts, but look at where NMRs might be based and where I can use an NMR as a service, I can do that as well. The back end of symplectic elements looks a little bit like this. Just to show it off, this is my own profile, and I can feed information on my academic outputs into here, which then becomes something that my institution can report on in the reporting hub, or can then be pumped into a publicly facing profile page, which then promotes my research or my outputs. I think I'm now being told that I only have a minute left, so I'm going to stop and address any questions if there is any questions. Thank you very much for listening.
Cool. Thanks so much, Anthony. Another whirlwind tour. These talks are not very long, are they? But so much cool stuff. So there are a couple of questions. We might have time for I'll go chronologically. So in this system, and I think it was symplectic when this came through, can you find where the raw data is for large data sets when you only have the grant number?
Yeah, so that is something that we try to do as a company as often as possible. So link grant number to, but where that grant number is being acknowledged in other formats, so non-traditional research outputs. So really very good question. Yes, in essence, we can, not always. We're not capturing 100% of those links, obviously. But yeah, I should say at this point, I'd be very, very happy to demonstrate if you reach out to me directly to demonstrate how we'd be doing that. That would be probably more likely something that I can show off in 30 minutes or maybe more.
Fabulous. Well, yeah, maybe next time. So I think you'll be able to see those questions. So take a look in the live Q&A, Anthony, and thanks again. And now I'm going to invite our next two speakers. Actually, this is a joint presentation, and it's the final one of this session. So it's James Wilmot and Varvara Efremova. They're from the Australian Characterisation Commons at Scale from the University of New South Wales, Sydney. And they're talking about introducing Open Data Fit, which is a fair data analysis and publication platform for the web. So looking forward to that one. Thanks, guys. Hand over to you.
Thanks, Georgina, for that introduction. Hi, everyone. My name is Varvara. In this talk, my colleague James and I will be introducing the Open Data Fit platform, which has been developed as part of the Australian Characterisation Commons at Scale project. I'll go through what motivated us to develop this platform and give an overview of its functionality. And then James will take you through a quick demo and dive into the details of its implementation. Our journey towards developing Open Data Fit started with BindFit, which was a relatively simple online tool we developed for use in supramolecular chemistry. Previously, analysis was done sort of haphazardly using Excel spreadsheets or scripts written by individual researchers. So we developed this tool to simplify and somewhat try to standardize that process. It uses a straightforward nonlinear regression algorithm to fit a dataset that's uploaded in CSV or spreadsheet form. And then it displays the resulting optimized parameters, fit graph, statistics, etc., in a simple-to-use web interface. Once the analysis is performed, the complete analysis can be saved in BindFit's database and referenced by a unique URL. So this is an example of a saved analysis that we have. You can navigate to this URL down here to see an exact replication of the analysis that was run and all the data and parameters that went into it. That URL can then be cited in a publication, making the analysis easily visible and reproducible for anyone reading your paper. So BindFit proved to be quite popular. We've had 70,000 sessions since its release in 2015, with quite a long average session time of more than 4 minutes per session. We've also had 300 citations, and these are just ones that we've been able to track. So what are the lessons that we learned from BindFit? We learned that users particularly valued its ease of use by people with no programming experience, as well as students and people new to the field. Also, its standardization of the analysis method, which aids with reproducibility. And in particular, its ability to easily publish a complete analysis by simply referencing its URL in a publication. We had a lot of interest in integrating more and more algorithms into the BindFit platform that went beyond its limited initial target audience. So we started thinking, how could we go about extending BindFit's model to other disciplines? So the problem that we set out to solve when designing Open Data Fit was essentially a generalization of BindFit that would be usable across different fields. The problem as we saw it was twofold. Firstly, most scientists just don't have enough time or resources to develop user-friendly documented analysis tools, which often results in knowledge loss and reinventing the wheel between groups or even within the same field. Even where good analysis tools are available and the author is really dedicated to publish every detail of their workflow, it can still be very difficult to reproduce as there are so many hidden variables involved, such as what version of analysis tool was used, what environment was it run on, the exact input data and parameters, and so on. And so all of this adds up to a lack of reproducibility across many scientific fields. So we set out to build Open DataFit to try to address this problem. We were hoping to develop a discipline-agnostic platform to manage and publish generic analysis workflows. So we wanted Open DataFit to provide a similar user experience to BindFit while meeting FAIR principles and being as field agnostic as possible. So to that end, we needed it to firstly be able to execute arbitrary Python code, as well as having the capability to expand to other languages in the future. We chose Python initially just because it's widely used in the scientific field. We needed to capture the complete analysis pipeline all the way from data collection to publication. And that would include the analysis code itself, a containerized and versioned execution environment, input data, metadata, parameters, and all of its outputs. We also needed to store the analysis in a persistent database, which could then be cited via a unique URL in our web app, as well as searchable via the web app's interface. And we needed to decide on a standardized file format for storing all of this information in a portable way. For this, we came up with a self-contained JSON-based definition file called a data package. This was extended from an existing open source standard called frictionless data, which James will talk a bit more in detail about in the next section. And finally, we also wanted to provide tooling to allow algorithm authors to create user-friendly interfaces to their analysis apps with minimal coding knowledge required. In this way, Open DataFit is somewhat similar to RStudio's Shiny package for those of you that have used it, but with a few more opinions around data and metadata management in a scientific workflow context. So our initial application for the Open DataFit platform and its role in the ACCS project was developing a small angle scattering workflow based on the existing widely used SASView Python software package. So I'll hand it over to James now for a quick demo of that.
Thanks, Havara. So hopefully what you're looking at here is a screencast of the web application as based on my local machine. So what we're looking at here is the front page of the web application just after you've signed in. And what it is a feed of my own data packages, as well as those of my collaborations. So each of these tiles that we're looking at here represents the entirety of a data analysis workflow, including its data sets, the parameter space for the algorithm, as well as the algorithm and any visualizations associated with those data sets and those parameter spaces. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click in to one of the data packages that I own. We might be waiting for 5 seconds. All right, so what we're looking at here is the entirety of a data package as rendered by our web application. So what I can do is I can upload a new file by clicking over here. I can select a file of data. And so what it's done is it's gone away and rendered the data as well as a very basic fit. What I can do now is I can select what options that I want to fit. So I'm going to select concentration salt, which is varying the parameter space of this data package. And what I can do is run. That's a very crap fit, but I'll take that away and try again. And what this is doing is it's uploading the parameter space to the algorithm and it's executing it in a microservice-based environment. So what we think is the beauty of what we've done is that the entirety of the data analysis is defined in it's encapsulated in its entirety in this data package. So where this is comparable and where we can contrast with BindFit is that there was a lot of knowledge that was actually in the BindFit web application itself, so it wasn't portable. So what I'm going to actually do is we're going to actually step through a data package that I prepared earlier. We can't really see that, can we? And so what this is that this is the entirety of a data package. So what I can show you is that, so each data package has a number of keys. So if anyone's familiar with JSON, this would look a little bit familiar. And each So the first key that I'm interested in is the display, and this is what defines in the data package how the web application is laid out. So, and I can look at the layout and a specification, and so all the tabs, so we've got tab names and then all of what's actually rendered in the tabs, which are the corresponding views. So another part of the data package are the resources. So this is where we store things like data sets and the parameter spaces for the algorithm, as well as like any outputs from the algorithm itself, including the fits. And these are to the frictionless data specification, which is a pre-existing spec. We haven't invented this in particular, as well as all the files. And also maybe of interest to this audience is the actual algorithm itself. And this is stored as a base64 file, as well as all the inputs and outputs that this Python code requires. All right. And so, yeah, this is just a slide of the different components that we've used. So frictionless is a pre-existing specification where we can store tabular data, as well as like the data package, which is a wrapping, an encapsulated wrapper around resources and that sort of thing. And the other part that we use that was pre-existing is the Vega visualization grammar, which is the way that we define our views as part of the web application. So this is the team. And so at some point, we're hoping to get into production, and we're going to have a closed beta towards the end of September. So if anyone's interested in testing a small angle scattering pipeline with us, please email us, and we'll get you involved. So I think it's question time.
Great. Thank you, Vivara and James. We have some questions sitting here in the Q&A, so we'll get straight into those. So first off, how does this compare to other similar applications like Galaxy and bioinformatics?
That's actually a tough one for me. So I haven't personally heard of Galaxy. So not sure. I'm not sure I can answer that one.
I suppose what we've really tried to focus on is that everything is encapsulated in a data package. So including like the algorithm and its execution context, which is a container. So we can use Docker containers and Singularity containers. So, and as well as, and we really, as Vivara was saying, we really wanted to make it quite fair. And in this case, so we've picked a data standard off the shelf, which is the frictionless data spec, which is an opinion about how you structure your data, the metadata associated with it, as well as the description of the tabular schema itself.
Okay. Righty. Now, next question. How does it handle large data sets and big processes? In other words, how do you stop students from breaking the HPC?
Yep. So currently, because we started out with BindFit, which is very small data sets, very easy computational tasks, we're essentially just running on AWS Lambda, so it's not a HPC environment. We do plan on extending to HPC environments in the future, but that's sort of a long-term goal. So it's not currently an issue for us at the moment.
Okay. Well, I'm going to say final question for now, but more may come through. We do have time, folks, so feel free to drop them in. Why aren't the unique URL, why are we not using perhaps the unique URL, not DOI? Would it be difficult to move to a DOI?
Yeah, so that's in our timeline. We will eventually hope to mint DOIs based on these unique URLs. For that, we'd need to essentially have a published state for a workflow where no further edits can be made after it's in this published state, and then we can mint a DOI based on that. So that's definitely something we're planning for the platform quite soon.
And we'd actually use DataSite as the minting service, which is
Awesome. I'll give the audience a moment to populate any extra questions. And in the meantime, knowing that you have got a bit of time, is there anything either of you desperately wanted to cover that you didn't?
Have we got any extra slides?
I'm sure I don't mind a coffee slightly earlier, but
No, I think we pretty much covered everything we wanted to cover.
All right. Well, the virtual round of applause for you two. Thanks so much for sharing that work. And with that, I think we can close off this session around data, manipulating, managing, just dealing with it. It's a challenge for everyone. So thanks again for all the engagement, and we look forward to seeing you in the final session after afternoon tea break. Grab your coffee or your cup of tea or whatever, and we'll see you there. Thank you.